this video, I will explain Chapter 3, Pip's Adventure from the textbook Lit.Reader. There will be questions in between the explanation, which will be your assignment. You will write down the questions and write the answer in your own words based from what you have read from your textbook as well as from this explanation. So before I start with the explanation, I will give you a brief introduction of the chapter. So the story Pip's Adventure, it has been taken from the novel Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. The main character, the protagonist, is Philip Pirrip, who is better known as Pip in the story, who is an orphan raised by his uncaring sister Georgina, who is also known as Mrs. Joe, who beats him regularly, and her husband Joe Gargery, who is a blacksmith and also Pip's best friend. They live in the marsh area of Kent, England, 20 miles from the sea. Now, the opening scene of the story shows that Pip is in a graveyard paying his respects to the graves of his parents and brothers. It was an evening time and he felt very lonely and frightened, and so he began to cry. Then all of a sudden a voice startled him. It was a dreadful looking man who was dressed in rough grey cloth with a great iron on his leg. He was wet, muddy, and looked miserable, and his teeth chattered in his head as he held Pip by the chin. He asked Pip's name and where he lived. Pip then told him his name and showed him the village about a mile or more from the church. The man then looked him for a moment and then turned him upside down to empty his pockets. But he found nothing in them, only a piece of bread which he ate right away. After that, the man asked Pip with whom he lived. Pip answered him and told him that he lived with his sister and her husband, who is a blacksmith. So when the man heard that, he immediately asked Pip, who was trembling with fear, to get him a file, which is a tool to cut chains, and some food from his house. So Pip, out of fear, agreed to get him what the man wanted and promised him to bring him all that he needed to him the next day early in the morning. Okay, now from what I had just explained, answer these following questions. Question number 1. What was Pip doing in the graveyard? Question number 2. Whom did he stumbled upon in the graveyard? Now, so Pip ran home as fast as he could. When he reached home, Joe was sitting in the chimney corner, and he told Pip that Mrs. Joe, his sister, was looking for him everywhere. Now Pip was rather depressed to hear this piece of news. So after some time, Mrs. Joe came home. Then she sat down to prepare tea and cut a huge slice of bread and butter. She gave half of it to her husband Joe and the other half to Pip. Pip then managed to slip the bread down the leg of his trousers without being noticed. That night, poor Pip had an unpleasant night as he was thinking of the dreadful promise that he had made to the man in the graveyard. So the next day, he got up really early and quickly took some bread, some cheese, about a half a jar of minced meat, and the slice of bread and butter. He tied them up in a handkerchief. He also took some brandy from a store bottle, a meat bone, and a pork pie, which he found on an upper shelf. After that, he got a file from Joe's tools and he ran out of the house. When Pip reached the graveyard, he found the man waiting for him eagerly, who looked half dead with cold and hunger. He ate the food which Pip brought for him in such a way that Pip, in spite of his fear, was quite pitiful over him, and he told the man that he was glad he was enjoying the food. The man thanked him, and then Pip left and ran towards home. Now, your question number 3. What happened when Pip reached home? Question number 4. What did Pip take with him from his home before going back to the graveyard? Okay, so Pip spent his morning in fear that he might be caught for the disappearance of the pork pie that his sister made. Mrs. Joe was busy the whole day preparing the dinner, as they were expecting some guests. Pip could not bear any longer, so he ran out of the house and saw a party of soldiers with their muskets. They had come to Joe to mend the handcuffs, for they were searching for 2 convicts who had escaped from the prison and were hidden in the marshes. So this incident turned the attention of Mrs. Joe from the disappearance of the pie. After Joe mended the handcuffs, the soldiers went off, and they were followed by Joe and one of the visitors. Joe took Pip with him. Pip hoped that they don't find the convicts, but the soldiers soon caught them, and one of the convicts had turned out to be the man Pip met in the graveyard. Now, when the man looked at Pip, Pip shook his head to try and let him know that he had said nothing to anyone about him. The convict, without looking at anyone, told the soldiers that he wanted to say something in order to prevent other people from being under any kind of suspicion. And he goes on to say that he had taken some food from the blacksmith's house. So after that, the boat came and the convicts were taken back to the prison. Now, question number 5. Explain how the convicts were caught and what happened after that. So now, a few years later, money was sent to Pip for his education by a mysterious friend. Pip discovered the true identity of this mysterious friend only when he was quite grown up, and that mysterious friend was none other than the very same convict whom he had met in the graveyard that fateful cold evening. So the story ends on that note. We have come to the end of the session. That is all for today's video.